Hi, I'm Tim Penketh, the founder and CEO of TheFutureEconomy.ca. In this interview, I spoke with Byron Holland, who's the president and CEO of the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, or Cira, and we spoke about the future of the internet here in Canada. He laid out his priorities for how Canada has to take a multi-stakeholder approach to ensuring that all Canadians everywhere have reliable and secure access to the internet, and why he believes this is an issue of national competitiveness at the global level for Canada. Enjoy. Well, I'm really interested to get into this conversation about the future of the Canadian internet, and I'm glad to have you as an absolute expert on the topic. I want to start with a bit of a broad question. So it's been a time of change and uncertainty on the internet, and Canadians are becoming concerned about cybersecurity, regulation, access, and data privacy. So I'd like to know from you what you think has led us to this moment.
Well, I think we always knew the internet was very important, but the pandemic has really brought that into stark relief. Just how critical the internet is to literally every facet of our lives as individuals and society writ large. And I think that, over the past year and a half through the pandemic, we've learned an awful lot of lessons about how society functions online when it really has to. And I hope that we can take some of these lessons that we've learned as we go back to whatever the new normal ends up being. But it's really critical that we don't lose those lessons, and that they really help enable the digital future that we're all rushing headlong into. And I think importantly, how they ensure that the digital future is inclusive, that it's safe, that it's secure, and that it's really accessible to every single Canadian. I think the other thing that's important here is, prior to the pandemic, there have been growing frustrations with how the internet is operated, whether it's the concentration of power among some of the biggest actors on the internet, and really the lack of guardrails for how many things are done on the internet, how companies act on the internet, and how individuals are behaving towards each other on the internet. In other words, I think most Canadians have agreed we need a set of basic guardrails for how the internet is operated going forward.
I'd love to hear from you what you identify as the major issues on the horizon. So going forward, for the future of the internet in Canada, what do we have to be watching out for?
The first one is access. How do we ensure that every Canadian who wants to be on the internet can be on the internet? Every Canadian business that needs to be on the internet can be on the internet. And I think there's a couple of factors there. One is, do we have enough competition? Do we have enough competition for access that allows for a truly competitive environment and, as a result, fair and reasonable pricing? Because access to the internet is going to be a major factor in Canada's economic growth as we exit the pandemic. Another one is privacy. And that's a really, really critical one, because survey after survey shows that Canadians just do not feel like their privacy is being respected online in any way, shape, or form. And I think it's pretty disappointing that the recent modernization of Canada's privacy laws really didn't get anywhere during this last term of government. And it's essential that privacy regulation be addressed before we start regulating other digital issues, so that either none of the big actors have their strength and power entrenched, or that we miss out on ensuring that regulation adequately delivers to small and new and innovative companies, as well as individuals. So to me, privacy is like a core foundational element that has to be addressed before we can build other sensible rules, guardrails, guidelines, regulations with regards to the internet. And the third and final one is really around cybersecurity. We can't do anything effectively on the internet if we don't have trust. And trust is absolutely critical. Now, how do we have trust? I mean, there's a number of ways to do it, but one is to ensure overall security. The openness and transparency of the internet in its early days, part of what made it so successful, is essentially now being weaponized against the internet. So we need to think about, how do we maintain this wonderful global resource, this free and open space for all to connect to, while ensuring trust? And part of that is through cybersecurity. And we need to think about, I think, internet infrastructure in ways that we have thought about other critical physical infrastructure. So whether it's utilities, bridges, pipelines maybe, are they safe? Are they resilient? How are they being protected by the owners of that infrastructure, or by governments in communal infrastructure? So I think there's definitely a bigger role for government to play to ensure that Canadians are safe, that businesses can prosper, and that internet infrastructure remains secure and resilient.
One topic that has come up throughout your answers is that of cybersecurity and how we can protect our businesses, our governments, our citizens from cyber attacks in Canada. I'm wondering if you think you think we need a national strategy on cybersecurity in Canada, and if yes, what would that look like for you?
We don't have an overall strategy for cybersecurity in Canada. It's piecemeal, it's organization by organization, vendor by vendor. And I think that what that really nets out to is that people hope for the best. And I think we can all agree that hope is not, in fact, a strategy. And that we do actually need a coordinated national strategy on cybersecurity. It doesn't have to be a heavyweight monolithic, but it has to be an overall strategy for cybersecurity right across Canada, and one that brings in all the major players to participate in the development of it. Private sector, technical community, law enforcement and intelligence community, clearly, governments, certainly the small and medium enterprise, because right now those are the ones being targeted to a great degree by the bad actors that we see and read about every day on the front page. This is not an aberration now. This is a consistent story, and it's a story that cries out for a consistent and understood strategy. Now, that being said, there are actors in this space doing good work. The Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, for one, I think is doing some great work and a lot of heavy lifting in this space. To be transparent, we do some work with them and have had the benefit of watching what they're doing. And they're doing some great stuff, but they're one organization in Canada. And, they and we and others are up against bad actors and hackers. And hackers aren't, a kid in the basement anymore. They're professionally organized, run like a well-oiled machine in business themselves, as well as the actual state-based bad actors. They're all upping their game, right? I mean, we see the level of sophistication in hacks, whether it's on pipelines or other major infrastructure, let alone all the individual companies, and quite frankly, the myriad of attacks that you never see or hear about, that the businesses quietly make them go away, i.e. pay the ransom, which is not a great story, because everybody's operating as an independent actor. There isn't an overall strategy and layer of protection writ large. And I think that we need, as a country, to be able to provide some of those basic protections, including some of the most basic stuff like cybersecurity awareness training, to help end users, often unsophisticated users, to practice the very basics in good cyber hygiene.
Absolutely. Well, one of the best ways to keep safe online is not being online, but obviously that does not work in this day and age. So I want to know what has to be done, and if you can, by who, to really improve rural access to the internet in Canada. What do we have to do to close that digital divide and get every last person access should they want it?
Yeah, that is a really important question for Canadians. And quite frankly, it's for all Canadians, not just folks who live in rural and remote communities, because all Canadians can benefit by rural and remote folks being online. I mean, we never know where the next best idea, the next best invention is going to come from. I think the first thing that's really critical to ensuring that is about competition, having good competition for fast, high quality, robust internet access is really foundational to ensuring also broad access in as many places as possible. And I think, regulators who are doing work in exactly this space must do more to encourage that kind of competition. They have a responsibility, I would say, to do that. But there are cases, without a doubt, cases in spaces where there isn't really a strong market incentive. I mean, think about how big Canada is, how sparsely populated it is. There are places where we likely need other kinds of provision of internet service than traditional private sector competition-based delivery of services. And that's where different kinds of models can be used, whether they're governments, co-ops, other kinds of not-for-profits potentially, community-based. And this is a global competitiveness issue for Canada, and we need to treat it as such. And it's something of a race, and we need to get on the start line and get going as fast as we can. So, you know, this isn't really just about business anymore, and many people think about the internet from a commercial standpoint, but it's so much broader than that. If we think, we sent all our kids home to get educated, and they had to get educated for a year online. I would say probably everybody's healthcare delivery has changed as a result of the pandemic. We see how important it is to have connectivity just to get basic access to your doctor, let alone anything more sophisticated. Access to government services. I mean, we've all had to figure out how to do all the things we normally do in the course of our lives, whether it's business, organization, individual, uh, online, because government effectively went online. You couldn't go to an office and get something done. You had to do it online. Well, that means you have to have connectivity, no matter where you are, if you're a citizen of our country. And certainly our leisure and communications demand access to the internet. Really, the internet is truly critical infrastructure, and it's got to be treated like that.
Absolutely. Well, without it, we wouldn't be speaking right now. So I'm glad we have access, but I agree. Everybody, I see it as a fundamental human right at this stage. So it should be available to everyone. Um, you've touched on so many topics that are super interesting, and I really appreciate the time you've given us already. But I want to ask you one final quick question. Hopefully, keep it to 30 seconds if you can. I'd like to ask you if you could pitch a person or a group of people with the power to really strengthen and improve the internet in Canada. Who would you pitch to, and what would be your call to action to them in 30 seconds or less, if you can?
The internet is growing. And when I say that, I mean, in the life cycle of the internet. And the early days, it was very private sector oriented. And that was great. It created that private sector orientation, created this incredible resource for the whole world. The internet right now is a little bit like the unruly late stage teenager. And it needs some guardrails, right? It needs some direction. And I'd say there's a moment in time here for some increased government intervention to help kind of re-level the playing field for all. It is a private sector oriented environment and should remain that for innovation and creativity and the kind of the generative world that it has been and can be. But we're probably at an inflection moment where that one actor who needs to play a short but material and important role in level setting for everybody, helping create that common set of fair rules, mitigating the chance to weaponize digital tools and services, it's probably government right now, but with the input of the multi-stakeholder community, not just a top-down, but a coordination of all of the relevant actors in the truly multi-stakeholder environment, the one that the internet has used to date to make it this incredible global resource used by potentially all.